What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my very special guest, Mr. Ned Black, who you guys are going to love. He's got all kinds of stories to tell from Vietnam, being a cop in Cheltenham. He wrote 2 goddamn books. The dude is a plethora of knowledge. He's a little computer illiterate. We had to get his son, my buddy Kevin, to help us out, get this thing up and rolling. But now we're here. We're squared away. So before I introduce Ned and tell you all about him, first of all, you can find the podcast pretty much anywhere there's a podcast platform, whether it's iHeart, Pandora, iTunes, Google Podcasts. Wherever you listen to a podcast, you can find Two Dates and a Dash podcast. The show is sponsored by E4 Strength. Beautiful part about this is I own that, so I can sponsor my own shit. So that's why I love this show. E4strength.com is the website. We are the leading manufacturers of eccentric strength training technology. We have plenty of colleges, high school, and pro teams that use our technology, but the ones that we are partnered with are the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Detroit Red Wings. New York Mets, Notre Dame High School out in New Jersey, they use it. Michigan football, Arizona football, a bunch of schools use it, and we're very proud of our technology. So if anybody's interested in learning more about E4 Strength, go to e4strength.com to learn more about what we're doing as far as technology and strength development. So thank you for that. All right, my man Ned Black. Ned is a retired deputy chief of police from Cheltenham Township, which is just outside of Philadelphia. If anybody's familiar with that area. He is a Marine, and I won't say former Marine because once a Marine, always a Marine. He's the author of 2 books. One of them, the one that we're going to talk about the most, I'm pretty sure, is We Marines, which is his most recent book. Here, I'll hold a copy of it up because I have one. We Marines, great book, awesome cover. I'm real excited to learn more about this and how he decided to become an author. So without further ado, Ned Black. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks.
I'm excited. You know, Kevin and I are buddies, your son. And when he lobbed out the idea of his pops getting on the podcast, I'm like, sure, man, that's awesome. You and I are pretty much the same, just different generations. And we're authors, we're cops, we're prior service. So I think we're going to find a lot of commonality. So let's start with one question, the same question I ask everybody on the show. And I don't care how you answer. It can be as long or as short. This is your hour. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Who is Ned Black?
Well, since I'm a Vietnam vet, you paint the era for you. I was raised through the 50s in Lower Olney in Philadelphia in an Irish area. Grew up like everybody else did. These are the days when everybody went in the military at age 21, whether you wanted to or not. And so everybody grew up wanting to be in the military. And didn't have a particularly happy home life, you know, like a lot of in that era, because I was born at the end of World War II. I think, and looking back, if I knew now, the entire world had PTSD and nobody realized it then. And since everybody had it, you just took it for granted, but it was a hard place at times. And like everybody, pretty much in my generation, just accepted the fact I'd be going in the military, except I always wanted to be a Marine. And finally just went into the Marine Corps and went through Vietnam, went through the Cuban crisis. I spent a year in the Navy, which I tend not to admit to anybody.
Probably smart.
And only because at one point in my life, I tried to drop out of school and run away and join the Marines. And the recruiter was a pretty cool guy. And he encouraged me to stay in high school. But he said, you know, kids can get into the Navy and still stay in high school, and you go to your drills one weekend a month, and you go to boot camp on your vacation. And I figured, well, all right. So my parents signed for me, and I went in the Navy and spent a year in the Navy, and then a career day at school. When the same recruiter walked in, I said, hey, you got me locked in the Navy, but I still want to be a Marine. And he said, I think we can work something out. Stop by the office. And I did, and that's kind of like the rest is history. I spent 5 years in the Corps after that. And I guess that's the short version. When I finally got out of the Corps, I don't know if you felt that or other people do, but I felt like I was adrift, like I didn't belong anywhere, especially, coming out of a combat environment and things like that. And I suspect I was kind of an adrenaline junkie too. I'm not so sure. And since my father was a police officer, I just figured, you know what, I'll just go on the police department. And at that time, a lot of guys were coming out of Vietnam and going right on the police from Vietnam. And that's what I did and stayed 40 years at it. And that's about it. I don't know how much more in detail you want me to go. When I retired, I didn't know I had to do something to keep myself busy. And I had always wanted to write something, and I had kept notes and different things. I had my squad leader notebooks. I still had maps and stuff, and just decided that an incident happened that made me think I'd write a book about Vietnam, to write it out of myself. That's why I did. I kind of did it as therapy for me. And that's what I did.
That's awesome, because it's actually funny that you say that. Well, not funny, but coincidental that you say that, because I wrote my book about my life and growing up with my older brother, Andy, who died in 1989. He was autistic and stuttered. And I wrote that book as therapy to deal with that loss. So it's kind of, I think a lot of people, especially guys that aren't necessarily, you wouldn't suspect would be authors. There's usually some catalyst that sort of brings that out, that forces you to sit down and cope with it, however you cope with it. And for me, it was writing, and obviously for you, it was as well.
Yeah. Well, the real catalyst for me to do this is the last time I was hit, and you see guys and the corpsman will always say, "Where are you hit?" And you look at the big holes, and he'd say, "Any place else?" And I saw some blood running down my arm. I said, "There." He said, "Don't worry about that. You got any place else that's bad?" So fast forward 35 years, I got a boil on my arm. When I was hit, there were some people got that messed up pretty bad. Turns out I had a bone flake from one of my buddies in my arm when he was killed. I could put a name on that bone, and it put me in a bad place in my mind when I realized when they popped this bone out, because I knew instantly what it was. And I went into this crisis thing at that time. Gee, should I put this in a box and send it to the wall? You think I would have sent it to his family? I mean, it was crazy stuff. And my wife kept a pretty cool head. She said, "Why don't we put it in the trees out back under the thing?" So I did. I put it in a little thing, put it in a box. I put a stone on it, a little flag. And on the Marine Corps birthday and Memorial Day, I take a beer out. I take a couple swigs. I pour the rest on him, and that's all I can do for him, But that was right after that happened. After I said, "You know what? I got to get this shit out of my mind." So I just sat down and started writing the book. And at the same time, there was the second thing happened. I have a lot of letters in this book, and the letters were given back to me by the person I wrote them. All those years, I got a phone call in my office one day, say, "Hey, I'm moving. I found all these letters in my attic. Would you like them back?" I said, "Absolutely, send them back to me." And that's how I used them and worked them into the book and things like that. So
It's amazing how that comes, like there's this circle of life that just sort of connects, the cosmos sort of aligns. And when you need it the most is when your pathway opens up. And that was a pathway that you probably would have had a difficult time, and I'm just guessing, writing a book about Vietnam and getting the dates and times and the timeline in order and all that, had you not had those letters, I'm sure.
Yeah. That and plus I wanted to illustrate something, because we all, where you were in Iraq, or and there's what you're doing that you tend not to tell people. You just write letters home and you're telling them whatever you're telling them. And then there's what you're doing. And what I used the letters for is how I wrote home. Then I wrote what I was doing, and I wrote what I thought about I was doing, which is all different things.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's the truth, there's the half truth, and then there's what I tell everybody else.
That's it. So,
I get it. I totally get it.
And that's what the book is written like. That's how it's written. So,
well, it's a great book. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't read the entire thing front to back. I'm probably 3/4 of the way through. Unfortunately, with being a full-time cop, full-time husband and father, running two companies, training people and running 2 podcasts and being a speaker. I got a lot of things happening. So I read in segments. But what I've read so far is brilliant. It's an easy read. I'm not a reader. People say, "Oh, you wrote a book." I'm like, well, up until I wrote a book, like the only book I read between 9th grade and 2002. So that's like 85 to 92. I read Animal Farm, and that's the only book I'd read cover to cover. And I only did it because I found it interesting how they were using farm animals with like hierarchy and giving them roles and stuff like that. So I found that interesting. Every other book, I just bullshitted my way through when I had to write a paper because I have a gift of doing that as well. So when if I read books, sometimes I have to read them because of the podcast. Sometimes I read them because someone took the time to send it to me, and I owe them the courtesy of at least reading the book that they sent me. But when I read, I only enjoy reading books when I can hear the author's voice. And I'd never heard you speak, but I've heard Kevin speak, and I know where he grew up and the Irish Catholic background and growing up in Olney and that area. And, I don't know if he was Olney or Frankfurt, but I know he's got all kinds of Kensington stuff going on with his wife. So I can only imagine what his dad sounded like. And now that I'm speaking to you, I'm telling you, that's the voice I was hearing in my head was this, older ex-Marine, ex-cop, still a Marine. I'm not going to offend you, telling a story about the Vietnam War and his experience. So I will tell you that the book was very well written. I could hear your voice. And I think that's ultimately what any reader wants to experience when they read a book, especially a factual book.
Well, it's not politically correct. I don't like politically correct. And I wrote that, and there are sometimes people said, "You really want to say it like this?" I said, "Hey, I'm writing this for people like me. I don't care about the other folks." And that's basically what I did. I wrote it for guys like me, and gals that if they may have been in a situation like that. I know when I was out on the repose after I was wounded, the nurses, they were pretty cool heads, and they would get it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So I think the best way to handle this interview is to break it into segments. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about the book. So I think the majority of our time together should be about your Vietnam experience and how, a lot of people today, back when you got out of the military, even when I got out of the military, PTSD wasn't a thing. You were either normal or depressed, right? Or fucked up in the head. So, I mean, that's kind of what the levels of trauma you received. And there wasn't a whole lot in, especially Vietnam, it's well documented how poorly the veterans from Vietnam were treated after the war and the 70s. And that was just a shitty time in our country's history to begin with. Too much acid, I guess, going on in the world. But today it's a whole different world when it comes to PTSD. And I don't, speaking of politically correct, everybody wants to give everybody a classification and a box to put them in. When in reality, it's just you either experienced some shit that you weren't prepared for or you didn't. That's really what it comes down to. And as a cop and a veteran and a Marine and same with me, you get it. You either are prepared for the shit you're about to see or you're not. When you went to Vietnam, growing up in Philly in the Olney section and living in the era that you lived in, did you find yourself prepared mentally and emotionally for what was about to happen? Or did you find yourself with that holy shit, what the fuck is this type mentality?
We all have what the fuck moments. But I have to tell you, there's a lot of victim mentality with Vietnam vets that has always bothered me. I did it and I'm glad. I've never been a victim. I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I extended for a year to stay in combat. I went in the Marine Corps because I wanted to go and be a Marine somewhere. The name of the place didn't matter. The Marine Corps sent me to be a Marine somewhere, and I've got no bitch. I really don't. There sometimes we're very bad. A lot of times we're very good. I'd do it again tomorrow if my body would hold up and I could. But I never had the victim mentality, and I tried to write my book on that thing without having I tried to write the gung-ho aspect of it without a victim mentality, and just the way it was, the way dealing with a lot of World War II guys that were still in, Korea guys that, some of the Korean guys were only in their late 20s.
Right.
World War II guys were very, very, they were in their mid 30s to late. So you really had a spread of people you were dealing with different philosophies. And I was early in the war, and I think my experience may be a little different than some of the people that were later in the war that were all conscripts and didn't want to be there and had a bad attitude. And they all talk about a lot of drugs and stuff. I never saw a lot of drugs. When, if you were a combat soldier or a combat Marine, when you're out, you're not smoked up on anything. You are as sharp. Your instincts, if they're not as sharp as they're going to be, you're going to get hurt. Somebody else is going to get hurt. And we really tended to look down on any troops that were going into the bush that weren't ready to do what they had to do. So I talked to a lot of guys from later year, and that may be a little different.
I think you hit something on the head that's probably, there's always cause and effect, right? There's always, if you just narrow it down to the simplest cause and effect moment, I think the guys that enlisted that had a passion and a want to serve their country, they're more in the classification of the Ned Blacks, the guys that were kicking ass, taking names, and proud of the fucking job they did. And then you have the guys that were crossing their fingers, hoping to God that their number wasn't called. And when it got called, they're like, shit. And they went, and they were just completely against everything. Even if they weren't against the war, they were going to be against the war because the Army or the Marines or whatever sent their ass over there. And I think they're the ones, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but I think they're probably more than likely the ones who were the protesters that went in and protested when they got back, the war, anti-war, anti-Vietnam, anti-military guys when they got out because they were giving a big FU to the government who sent them there.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. And I think personally, looking back, I think those people did a lot of harm in the long run. Now it's different. And, but in retrospect, they really did. The protesters and stuff, I have no respect for it at all. I mean, I still don't have any respect for them. As far as I'm concerned, they ran and left their generation alone in the field and just ran away from them.
Agreed.
And that's how I feel. Now, conversely, I'd like to talk to some NVA or hardcore BC that operated in the area I did. I mean, those guys were just doing what they had to do. And they were tough little suckers. I mean, and while I was in country, you took care of, we never shot humans, we shot gooks. Mm-hmm. So that's how that went. But as things go on, the only people I really had bad feelings about are the protesters that actively worked against us, and they treated us like shit when we came home. They really, really did. I mean, it was not good.
And it's hard to be a proud Marine in the face of all these people that are just spewing vile against you, I'm sure, right?
Well, it did, but I had a philosophy. I hated them back. So that was my philosophy, and that's just how I operated. And it is what it is, and I guess it worked out.
So when you left and went to the Marines and you went to Vietnam and you experienced everything that you experienced, you re-enlisted to extend for another year in country, and you come home to a world that was different than when you left, right? Because once you're experiencing the realities of war, I'm sure coming home to Philly and wondering what the hell you're going to do with your life, it probably puts you in a mindset that's like almost like a letdown. Like things changed and you didn't change with it.
Well, there was some of that, but the timeline is a little different than what you're saying, because I was in the Corps for 3 years before I went to Vietnam. My first gig right out of boot camp was Cuban Missile Crisis. And as a matter of fact, I got recalled off my boot camp leave by telegram and put into a unit at Camp Lejeune, and we were going to go off to Cuba because that was going to be World War III, Right. But when I hit Vietnam, I had been in the Corps just about 3 years, so it's not like I was a boot or worrying about anything. And when I came back from Vietnam, even I didn't do two full tours in country because I got medevaced. when I got medevaced, I think probably some of the saddest stuff. I was an E5 at the time, and they started the first East Coast Casualty Escort section. Marine Barracks Philadelphia did everything east of the Mississippi. Treasure Island did everything west of the Mississippi, and I became a body escort. I took 9 remains home, and after that, I went and told them I don't want to do this anymore. But that's I spent some of my last months doing body escorts, and then when I stopped doing that, I became one of the assistant wardens of the Naval Prison Philadelphia for my last 90, 120 days in Philadelphia, and that was it. So when I got out, I told you I fell adrift. I really did. I mean, I couldn't get along with the hippies. The hippies couldn't get along with me. I had a chip on my shoulder. I told you a nice way to put it is an adrenaline junkie. Not that I was, doing weird stuff, but I was doing weird stuff. And, then I went on the police department, and that was it. I stayed on that for 40 years.
What was it like? So that was probably what, mid
68. I went on the police department.
Oh, 68. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's, I got hired in 93. So I'm in my 27th year on the job. And I can remember, there was a couple guys that were your early 70 hires that were the old school, and you remind me of them a lot. And, I'm now, when you were retiring, I'm starting to hit that generational shift where I'm the miserable old fucking dinosaur that nobody wants to hang around with, because all I'm going to do is tell them that they're fucking it up. And that's just the way it is. So I never thought that I would get to that stage, because I just figured I'd either get fired or sued or something. Like, I didn't think I was going to make 27 years or just quit. But now that I'm here, I can only imagine what it was like to do 40 years. If I have to do 40 years, I'm telling you right now, someone's going to have to put a pillow over my face and end it, because I'm not doing 40 fucking years as a cop. I'm just not. It's just not happening. So when you get hired in 68, what was it like in Cheltenham as compared to what it is, say, today?
Well, not only Cheltenham, but everywhere, the job. And when I started out, they called it being in the business. When you went into the business, it was the laws were different. You still had the 7 fleeing felon laws in the Pennsylvania Code that changed in 73 or 74. The mindset, the 27-year-old guys on the job had come in the late 30s and early 40s. I mean, these folks had a mentality that was completely alien to mine.
Right.
And it was a different way of doing police work. I thought there was a lot more respect in police work. I mean, when I started out in the job, if I rolled up to a crowd on a corner in a police car and said, I want my corner back, guess what? Everybody left. It's not like that today.
No.
And with the political correctness, it wasn't, I used to get discouraged in my career. The only plus in my career is I moved through different things. I moved through data patrol into detectives, and from detectives, and then I went into staff. But I used to sometimes, especially when I was like a deputy chief and I had oversaw a lot of things, I would feel guilty, like I was sitting about taking action on guys that had done things that I had done a lot worse, but it was different times, and I get, I hear what you're saying. It just wears you out after a while. It just wears you out. But, I'm glad I did it, and then, managed to get through it. The name of the game, I always looked at the job. The name of the game was to get home safe to my family every day. I mean, there was more than one incident in my career where I found myself mentally saying, what the fuck are you doing? You got 5 kids and a wife at home. Why are you here in this situation? But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And
let's talk about the family part. And I'm going to ask some off the wall questions because I'm curious. And my background, my expertise is in human behavior and body language. That's kind of where I make that's my wheelhouse. And I always want to know what's going on in people's minds and understanding how their decision-making process works and their personality and things of that nature. So how long after you got out of the Marine Corps did you meet your wife and decided to get married?
I got married and I got out of the Marine Corps like summer '67, and got married in '78.
So 10 years after you'd already been on the job for 10 years and
Well,
basically.
yeah, but like a lot of other guys coming out of Vietnam, I had one that went quick and didn't last. I look at it as part of the Vietnam experience.
Right.
So, it used to be so bad among guys would say, it's in the water, don't drink the water. And
I think every
because
military guy at least has one fiance, if not a wife, from
Yeah.
that period. I was engaged when I was in the Army, and you think that's the be all and end all, and then you find out that was a fucking mistake.
But, all's well that ends well, and I was fortunate that it ended well, and that's where we are. But interestingly enough, you said with your interest in body language, some of the one book I wrote, the Annals of Time, is a direct. I used to keep myself up out on the street. I used to play a what if game all the time. I'd be driving along, especially we worked the 3 shifts, the 6 and 2 days.
Yep.
And it'd be night, and I'd say, all right, I'm coming up to a light. What would you do if a guy jumps out of a bush and points a shotgun at you? What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? And I'd drive them, what would I do if a car crashes in front of me? What's the first thing you do? And I would put all these scenarios in my mind. And I guess it's like sports psychology. I could feel myself getting pumped up, thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I had in my career at least once where somebody stuck a gun in my stomach and it gave me a plan on what I was going to do because I'd already thought about, hey, what am I going to do?
The mental reps. You were going through mental reps, yeah.
Well, your body, once your muscle gets it, your body doesn't know it didn't happen.
Right.
Your body thinks it's real. So I took that after a while, especially at midnight to 8, foggy nights and stuff like that. I took a little further and I said, hey, suppose I drive into a fob bank. And when I come out the other side, I'm somewhere else. What would I do? And I thought about that. And that's
sure you didn't take any
Annals of
LSD
Time.
in the 60s?
That's how the book, The Annals of Time, came about.
That might be an LSD trip that you were on in 1968 or something like that. Someone slipped something to you.
But, that's how I used to keep myself up on the job and keep myself alert and in the yellow zone, as they say. And,
What year did you write that book? I'm just curious timeline as far as when that happened.
This one, I 18. It got published in 18. It's only, We Marines came out a year later, and I have another one I'm working on now. I'm hoping to have out by the fall of 20. Man. So it's, I spent, after I retired, I got involved with a writing class, and I went to writing classes for a while, and then just, never thought I could write a book. But and then when I sat down with the Vietnam stuff and I started looking at my squad leader notebooks that I still had and different things and the letters, and I still had my maps, I could still follow the maps on what was happening. And I'm sure, like you and other veterans, I can still see some of those trails in my head. But, that's how that all came about. Just
All right, I'm going to go back to Vietnam a little bit here. When you were engaged in combat, when you were in the bush, you were on patrol, comparatively speaking to the guys that you were within your platoon, did you have ones, because you see all the movies, you see the movie Platoon, for an example, which has the gung-ho guy, the guy that's shitting his pants on every call, on every patrol. Like, there's the personalities within each platoon that makes up the cohesive unit. Was there personalities within your platoon that today you can remember people's names, their nicknames, what they were like? Like, do you still have those memories?
Up to a point. But here's the thing. Like I said, I was in for 3 years before. I always thought one of the big mistakes they made in Vietnam, when we deployed into Vietnam, and I had been in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii for 2 years with the 4th Marines. It was really a great out gung-ho regiment, the 1st Marine Brigade. And then when the Vietnam War started, they put us in Okinawa to do some extra training. And then I was with the group. We came ashore from the sea. It was like a World War II invasion when we landed in Chu Lai with the landing craft and stuff like that. We had been together in that company, some of us 2 years. But after about 60 days ashore, because of rotations, they decided to break all the companies up and move everybody different places. So when my rotation, I extended to stay with my company. After I re-enlisted, I extended for a year and came back down. I found out my company wasn't my company anymore. They had made A14E2. I ended up in the 1st Marines 50 miles away. Once I was in the 1st Marines, after the original company, I knew the people in my squad, period. I didn't know anybody else. They passed through too quick. And I was a squad leader, and basically I didn't encourage being friendly with anybody. I just wanted to get the job done. I had only like one really tight buddy I was with. He had an unfortunate thing. He moved up there, his entire squad from peacetime now. These are guys that pulled Liberty together in California. They pulled Liberty together, end up in Vietnam. They're a year in Vietnam, and in 1966, January the 5th, 1966, we walked into a very, very bad ambush. And his squad, 2nd squad, I was walking with 18 of us walked into the kill zone. The people the ones of us that ended up in the kill zone, I don't know, I guess within 90 seconds, there was only 3 of us that weren't dead or wounded. So he was one of them. But his squad that he lost, he had served together in peacetime with those guys and pulled Liberty with them and knew their girlfriends and I feel bad. I think he's still out on that trail myself. I mean, he never really came back from that. And that was one of the things. These days, when they send units in, they send a cohesive unit. You train together, you work together. I believe you serve better in combat if you're with guys you had been with, rather than all of a sudden a bunch of strangers coming together. Right. And that was it. So, but everybody, I will say, no matter what, everybody was a Marine. There was none of that Hollywood stuff, and everybody was a Marine. Everybody had a job to do and wanted to do the job, and that was it. When we weren't in the field, I never saw a lot of drugs. That may be hard to believe, but we drank like fish. I mean, everybody was drunk whenever they could be. But that was it. We were just Marines. Everybody was just a Marine, and we went out and did what we were supposed to do.
You did Marine shit.
That was it. That was it, because it was dangerous not to. It was dangerous to everybody not to. I mean, if you were a screw up and you went out, and that was not good. If somebody was with you that wasn't as sharp as you wanted them to be, because you had to depend on them to keep your ass alive. Because the hardcore units and they were tough soldiers. It took me. I didn't realize until I came home, some of those guys, they had 3-war cadre like we did. They fought the Japanese, they fought the French. We were their 3rd war.
Right.
On their turf. If I had known that going in, I'd probably been shitting myself. But when you look back, that's the way it was. I'm amazed that we beat them up as bad as we did.
Having respect for your enemy is something I don't think people give enough value to. I think understanding, and I tell this story all the time. So when I worked at West Pottsgrove, which is on the other side of Pottstown, and back from 96 till 2000, early 2002. And it's an urban little area, west side of Pottstown, borders the Penn Village. And
I'm familiar with it.
So we had a lot of shit, a lot of drugs and small gang shit going on. And I remember I would arrest a lot of guys. That's back when I was giving a shit about arresting people and chasing bad guys down alleys and kicking in doors. And I remember when I left, though, because I always treat my enemy, I say enemy, but there's good guys and bad guys. They were the bad guys. But it was never personal for me. It's a job. My job, they had their job. Whoever won that battle was the winner of that battle. And it is what it is. And I remember when I left, I had 5 or 6 guys that I had arrested a bunch of times. come to the police station and essentially say, we're going to miss you. Like it was one of those weird things. I'm like, really? This is like, they came by like, listen, man, good luck with what you're doing. We had a blast, dude. I remember that time you were chasing me on the alley. You always treated me with respect, and you always treated me with, it was the game. They understood the game. And I don't think anymore, on both sides, cops and the bad guys, that there's no respect anymore for one another. Like there's nothing wrong with having some healthy respect for the people you're going against. It doesn't mean you're afraid of them. It doesn't mean you're going to take it easy on them, but you're going to do your job, but you have respect for them. And I think in combat, if you look at, I tell people all the time, if you could bottle the VC or Al-Qaeda or whoever, whatever the current, super bad guys are, if you could bottle their commitment to whatever it is they're doing, if you're willing to blow yourself up in a room in order to get the 72 virgins in the next life, that's some commitment right there. I respect that. I still want to blow them up myself, but I respect the fact that they're that committed. And earlier today, I interviewed Lori Chapman Longfritz, who's the sister of John Chapman, Air Force combat controller, who died valiantly in 2002 on Roberts Ridge in Takur, Afghanistan. And for years, his heroics were covered up by the Navy and the Air Force for whatever reason. I'm sure I have my own opinion, but recently some drone footage came out of that battle, and it shows what a fucking warrior he was. And I can tell you that he respected his enemy. He respected the battlefield they were on. And I don't think that exists today. And I think in what you're talking, when I'm hearing you say, when you're talking about your battles against the VC and you were their third war, and there's some respect there that these were some badass motherfuckers who were just doing their job. And at the end of the day, that's all it is.
And they were as smart as we were. You have to, they could do stuff that was incredible. I mean, but we were smart too. So I would like sometime to sit down and talk to somebody that operated in the area. A couple of them published books. I even went the thing to get and read their books, to read what they wrote about that area that I operated in. And it's interesting. I find it very interesting. I have no animus toward them at all.
No,
I have animus toward the protesters, but they're the only people I still have animus toward.
Did you see the Rocky Blyer piece on ESPN?
No.
You should look that up. He goes back to where his unit was in Vietnam, and sits down and speaks with, it was like a grandson or something of one of the guys that died in probably a battle with his unit. And it's a really heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching piece, but I think it's well worth your time to watch. But you can tell he respected the process, and I struggle with that. I struggle with the fact that because of it used to just be us and them. There wasn't a whole lot of outside influence. There wasn't a lot of media or social media or phones or whatever. It used to just be us against them.
Right.
And sometimes they win, sometimes you win. It's the game of cops and robbers. I mean, that's why we played it as a kid. And I think back in the days before it became every eye's watching and everybody's judging off 20-second video clips, you could have respect. And I don't think there is no mutual respect between the good guys and the bad guys anymore. And to me, that's made it so much more difficult, because they know their level and ability to get away with things is 10x whatever it was when you were a cop, or 100x from when you were a cop, and 10x from when I've been a cop. They can get away with so much more now, simply because the public is watching, and every little movement the cops make is going to be judged with a microscope and with no understanding of what's actually happening.
Well, that's true. And I think with political correctness, unfortunately, different groups, we all hate each other. Mm-hmm. And if we're not of the same group, then we tend to look with suspicion on another group, because the media is pushing it, politicians are pushing it. And I think it's very, very dangerous. I really do. And I've thought it's very, very dangerous for years, but I don't know what to do about it. And the politicians, they don't. they're basically for the politicians. So
It's the only business you can go in broke and come out a millionaire.
that's true. That's true.
And do absolutely nothing. Quick question. What year did you retire from police work?
I retired. My last day was 1st of November of 2007.
Okay. So you were in the transition from when it went from being the old school police work into the newer age of police work. And you didn't, thankfully you got out before it became the ridiculous age of police work, which we're in right now. What was your leadership style? And did you bring any of your Marine Corps harder edge mantras and beliefs into law enforcement when you became a leader? Not as a patrol officer, but when you became a sergeant or above.
I absolutely did, but I always had a line, and people I work with might not have liked the line, but they knew where the line was. As long as you stayed on your side of the line, God bless you, have at it, and I'll always try to cover your back if I can. If you cross the line, you've chosen to cross the line, and if you're snagged, you're snagged. I'm gonna, I'll be there if you cross the line. And basically that was it. Everybody knew I had a line. Everybody just did what they had to do, and I covered them as much as I could, got them what I could, and then if they decided to work against it and go against it, then they did that to themselves. I didn't do it to them. They'll pay the price. And that was basically my philosophy.
So what year did you receive? How long were you a cop before you received your first promotion of rank?
I was promoted to corporal in 73. So I went on in 68, 73, I made corporal.
And how big of a department was Cheltenham back then?
Back then, we were all hands with everybody, probably a little over 100.
And where's it at now? Do you know?
Well, right now they still have the auxiliary police. When I retired, all hands, civilians, the auxiliary police that worked under patrols, I think it was like around 140. So I don't think
it's a whole lot more than that.
I don't know what they have now. I know the patrol commander. When I had patrol, I had 100 people under my command totally on this. So, but I don't know what they are now. I mean, things have changed. And when I started, Cheltenham was probably more like, well, there was not a lot. The first shopping centers were built in Cheltenham anywhere. So I mean, it was a different place. It was like you would find further up county or something like that. Now, we always said Cheltenham has a lot of a Philadelphia flavor to it. So,
across the street.
Yeah, the yellow line doesn't stop anybody. Right. So that's.
What was your if you had to self-assess yourself as both a Marine and as a police officer at whatever rank and whatever portion of your career, is there one thing that you can look back on and say, I would say that my greatest strength was blank? What would that be?
I did the best.
We'll deal with the Marines first.
I did the best I could. That was it. I just did the best I could.
And what was did you ever worry about, and I know I'm not in charge of shit as a cop, and intentionally, I've never tried to get promoted. I just simply don't have a big enough passion for it. What was the thing that allowed you to progress through the ranks of the police department that allowed you to still remain, to have the respect of the guys underneath you? What do you think if they had to give one opinion about you during that period of time, what would it be?
Maybe professionalism. I didn't believe to be a leader I had to be everybody's best bud. I just had to be a fair leader. And that's basically what I tried to do.
I think
I didn't glad hand everybody
I think the hardest thing for a leader to do is to be honest. Because they want to, I see it, and I'm sure Kevin, your son, can have hours-long conversations about this. But for me, where I see the issue with leadership is if you're not a good communicator, if you don't have the ability to tell them what you want, when you need, and how you want it done. And then what the rules are. Like you said, you got a line. If people don't know where the line is, or the line is constantly moving, or they're blanket policying everything when one person does one thing wrong and they create a new policy that no one else has violated, but yet they make a new policy for it because of one idiot, that's when you lose. I think you lose the respect of the people beneath you, because you haven't clearly communicated with each individual person what it is you want them to do, and you haven't set the standard by which you want it done, and you
I
haven't
agree.
stayed consistent.
Consistency is important. You have to be consistent. People, if you're consistently a hard ass, people learn to deal with you. All right, you're a hard ass. If you're consistently an asshole, people learn to deal with you because you're. So I mean, and they'll actually work better knowing where you are consistently than trying to figure out who walked into work today. So consistency, I always thought, was very, very important, and I tried to stay consistent. And that's, you know, I still kept that I did it and I'm glad attitude. So I mean, that's the way it is.
So let's talk about being a dad. Yeah, I can only imagine what Kevin was like growing up. But you have 5 kids, right?
Yes.
What's the names and ages of each one of them, so we can sort of get an idea of the separation?
Well, Eddie is just turned 50. Chris is 48. Bernadette is 40.
I'm testing you now.
44. Kevin, Kevin. How old are you, Kevin? And Jimmy is 38, I believe, or 39. So
4 boys and 1 girl.
And 1 girl, yeah.
And the girl's in the middle.
She's in the middle.
Nobody messed with her, right?
No, nobody. There was a couple dates she brought home that I used to have what I called come to Jesus talk with them in the backyard by the grill, and a couple of them left the house after the talk. But that was it. And but they're all good. 3 of the boys went in the military. 2 of them are combat vets, so they did good. The oldest boy has his own business, and my daughter is a court reporter. She's in in the sector. Her husband's an attorney. So I mean, they've all knocked on wood, turned out good.
What was your parenting style like? Were you consistent as a parent?
I think I was. I'm looking at one sitting behind me, trying to get a sense of but I mean, I had the line, and as long as they didn't cross the line, there was no trouble. Some of them tried to move the line frequently.
And sometimes you got to course correct, right?
But yeah, that's it. I've been fortunate. They've all been good, thank God. They're good. Their kids are good, so I've got no complaints.
Well, I think that's awesome, because I think, how old are you now? 70?
Right now?
Yep.
75.
75 years old. So you're 3/4 of a century, not to make it sound older than it is, but it's 3/4 of a century. And in that 3/4 of a century, you've accomplished many things. A lot of people will take segments of a person's life and judge them based on that segment, instead of looking at the totality of their life. And when, having lost my brother at an early age, and people ask me all the time, why do I do all these things that I do? Why do I do a podcast? Why am I a speaker? Why have I written books? Why do I do this, that? Why am I an entrepreneur? Because I don't want anyone to ever just judge me for one thing. I want the totality of my work, my body of work, to be what people judge me. And when it's all said and done, when there's a church full of people who are standing there, celebrating your life, that's really what we live for, right? That's the greatest gift that we can give the next generation or our kids, is the memory of what we were like when we lived, the value and the legacy that we leave behind. And I think one of the coolest things about writing a book, and whether people, especially like we wrote, which is autobiographies, it's one of those things where it's like a trip back in time through your eyes. And that's something that will never, ever be gone. I wrote my life story with my brother so that my kids who never got to know him, never got to meet him, would know him. So that people who know me and know how I became who I am, they need to know the person that was the most influential in my life and why I am who I am.
I
And
agree with that.
I think writing your books, especially the We Marines book, allows people to sort of take a look at your body of work. Not saying anything's happening to you anytime soon. Don't get me wrong. But it gives you that body of work that people can reference, that allows, Kevin, who is so fucking proud of you. It's ridiculous. He's talked about you. We were at somebody's retirement party, and he was talking about you and saying, my dad would be great in your podcast. He wrote this book, this science fiction book, and he's writing one about his time in the Marines. He was a fucking cop. My dad is the fucking man. He needs to be on your podcast. That's why you're on my podcast. You got the best salesman sitting right next to you. And I think that's when you look back on your life, whether you're 35 years old or 75 years old, you should constantly always do an assessment, right?
Right.
Who have I been? Where am I going? What have I accomplished? Who have I impacted? What do I still need to fix that's fucked up? Those are the things we should be doing in our life. And I think, everything that I've heard in the last 45, 50 minutes has said that you have lived a life that others are going to be talking about for generations.
Well, I hope with We Marines, Vietnam was a long time ago now. I mean, the early Vietnam guys, we're the equivalent of a Spanish-American War vet or a World War I vet now. I mean, that was a long time ago, and I'm hoping that this, not only for the grandkids, but when the grandkids start having kids, this will be like somebody being able to open a book about a descendant that was in the Civil War or something and read, about that. Because I put a little genealogy in it, so they can, and that'll be good. If that happens, that'll be good. So
there was some intention behind it.
Yes, sure.
So it wasn't just get shit out of your brain thing. There was actually a plan on why.
Well,
I like that.
It came into that, and like I say, although you've read it, I wrote it for people like me that did what they did and don't regret doing what they did, and that's basically how it goes. I mean, I did it, and I'm glad.
I love that. I'm going to put that in the podcast notes. I did it, and I'm glad. And people, so I started another. So just to give you, and this is kind of an aside, but so I do this podcast, right? 2 dates and a dash, and if you don't know what that meaning is, your life's made up of 2 dates: the date you're born, the date you die. And the dash is the life that you live. And so for me, I want people who are living out their dash to be able to share their story. That's why I created this show. Now, I created another podcast that I just started last week, and I just released the second episode yesterday. It's called Third Shift Chronicles. Basically, it's the fucked up life that I've lived working majority of my life on third shift and the crazy shit that happens in life. And it's 15 minutes long. It's just me sharing stories, crazy stories. The first episode was sharing a story from my rookie year when went on domestic call, PFA situation. Guy broke back in after being served with the PFA, took his wife hostage. She broke free. He ran upstairs. I didn't know if the kids were up there. And I kicked the door in, and I'm going up the stairwell, and I see his feet. And I tell him to show me his hands. And he leans out and he goes, "Fuck you," and blows his head off right in front of me. And like, what the fuck? Totally, when you talk about mental preparation, in my head, I was working through how do I get him to give up or how do I blow his head off when he doesn't do what I tell him to do. Those were the two outcomes. I wasn't not one iota of my brain was thinking he was going to say fuck you and blow his own head off. That wasn't part of the scenarios I was working through. And but that's life. That's what it is. And I was there, and it's part of my, I shared a story yesterday about delivering a baby in the front seat of a Toyota. And the only thing I can remember about that entire incident was a baby's head and her vagina. That's it. I didn't know what she looked like. I didn't know what nationality she was. Nothing. The only thing I could remember was her vagina and the baby's head coming out. That's it. And I'm not ashamed of that. That's just what I remember until later when I got introduced to her and the baby and all that. But that day, that's the only thing I could remember was that. And that's what life is.
Yeah. It is.
Don't be afraid of the shit that you've had to do in your life and own it, own your shit.
But as time goes on and as the politically correct age gets more politically correct, I find, and especially in talking to Kevin, my father, they're third generation. My father was a police officer, so I'm their third generation. my father used to tell me stories when I first started, and I'd say, "Nah, you didn't do that." And he'd say, "We did." Well, I watched their eyes getting bigger. I've stopped telling them stories because I think, I don't want to pollute them on some of this stuff. But I could tell you stories that get incredible sometimes on what used to happen back in the day, and you didn't. It was just part of the job. You didn't worry about it. I once I never had anybody just blow their head off, but I went on a hospital case once, an apartment complex. Me and another officer, we walked in, and there was a man sitting on the couch, and it was bend around. There was a kitchen on the other thing. We said, "Sir, did somebody call about a hospital case here?" And he called to his wife. "Did you call about a hospital case?" She said, "Just a minute." She turned the corner to a ball-peen hammer and hit him on the top of the head. And that was our hospital case. So, I mean,
wow. And those are the things that the world, we forget because of the political correctness and because we want to forget our past and pretend it never happened. And whether it's the good parts or the bad parts or the ugly parts or the happy parts, shit happened. You're not going to change it. Slavery was a thing. The riots of the 1960s were a thing. It happened. It doesn't mean it was right. It's just fact. It happened. And I think we've lost track of the value of knowing our history and knowing our past and owning it. There's nothing wrong with owning your mistakes and then making them better, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And that's what America has been for 243 years. It's been about a plan, the greatest experiment ever done, and then in its journey and the highs and the lows. And depending on what era and what century you're in, there was some stuff that was normal and everybody thought it was great. And then 150 years later, you look back on it and you say, that's pretty fucked up. But it doesn't change the fact that it happened.
Just the fact that the police officers see routinely that most people will never, ever, you can't even write some of this stuff. I always tell the boys, I got a front row seat to the greatest show on earth. This is it. I had a job, a guy tried to commit suicide by Harry Carry. So he crawled behind the heater and opened himself up, started pulling stuff out, and realized it wasn't a good idea, and he didn't want to do it anymore. When we got there, he was trying to put it back in, and we all turned into T-Rex. Nobody wanted to touch him. So, but, wow, where do you expect to see somebody trying to commit Harry Carry,
Yeah, I had a guy slice his neck from ear to ear, and he missed his carotid on both, but he was flayed open with a razor, and he was bleeding out. He was 450 pounds, leaning into a tub, like on his knees, in like a hall bathroom where there was there wasn't room for two people to get in there. So luckily I lift weights, so I had to get underneath, and first of all, we had to pack his neck while he's bleeding out in the tub. And then I had to pretty much deadlift that fat son of a bitch and pull him out of the bathroom so that we could get him on his back and him onto a Reeves litter and get him out. Son of a bitch lived. And then 9 months later, he figured out the better way to do that was to just cut deep one time, and he bled himself out in his car. And the guy that was working for the coroner's office still gives me shit for saving his life the first time because he's the one that had to carry his fat ass out of a car. So, but nobody wants to hear those stories because we're calloused and cold. But you don't get through life seeing the shit you saw in Vietnam and stuff we've seen on the job without having some level of cynical.
The funniest stories are always generated by the worst things.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you cope. And if you think about it on the job, the funniest stories, please tell each other, are some of the ghastliest things sometimes. So
that's why I started that podcast, because I refuse to allow that shit to stay in my brain. Like I want to get back to the part where, we're kids and we sit with our dad, or Kevin sits with you and says, "Dad, tell me a story about what happened when you were a cop or what happened in Vietnam." And they were just enthralled. Doesn't matter if it's politically correct, but just the moment of being able to share experiences with someone else who doesn't have any fucking clue what that was like. And everybody's so afraid now to say anything anymore. And I'm just saying, fuck it. And I'm just going to share everything in my goddamn brain.
If that's good if you can. Now, my experience has been, I tend not to think about the job or any of these things. Even if I sat down to think about it, I couldn't decide what I wanted to talk to. But if Kevin or Jimmy, who is in Lower Merion, they come in the house, we'll be sitting having a beer, and they'll talk about a job, and then they're like flip cards in my head.
Yep.
I start seeing the jobs like flip cards in my head. Then they can't shut me up because I'm, and that's basically how it works. So
I'm luckily I stopped drinking for the month of January, so I started doing these shows sober. So there's a pretty good chance that one or two of these episodes I'm going to be hammered when I record it. So in the future, so I can't imagine what that's going to be like. But I'm okay with it. I'm at the point now where they can't get rid of me anyways. So and if they want to, I'll just quit. So I mean, it doesn't really matter. But life happens, and I own every piece of it. And I'm at peace, and it looks like you're at peace with the life you've lived. And I know that your kids are proud of you, and I can tell you when I can't wait to finish the rest of the book. It's a brilliant book, and I will put links to the book, both books, in the comments on the social media posts. And I'm really excited to see. Hopefully, this helps generate some book sales and gets We Marines a little bit more pub.
That's I'm looking forward to people reading it, especially guys I serve with. I've sent them around to different guys I serve with, and it becomes important for us not to forget.
Mm-hmm.
Especially it's a friend of mine threw a comment at me one time, and we were in combat. And he said, "This is one of those things that gets burned into your brain and tattooed onto your soul." And I've found that to be true. That there are still some ambushes and things that I was involved with, and some things we did that I'll never forget. I don't sit and dwell on them too much, but I certainly think about Vietnam and remember Vietnam, and that's just get along with life. And I'm in a better place than some of these guys that feel victimized, and still at this point in their life, they're still like victims, and they still feel like victims. And I told you, I was a Marine. I did it, and I'm glad. That's it. Marine Corps doesn't owe me anything. So that's how it was.
I think that's a great way to end the show. Hang tight. We're going to talk off camera once we're done recording. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank everybody for listening to this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you to Ned Black, U.S. Marine, Cheltenham Township, retired deputy chief, author of Annals of Time, and most recently, We Marines. Links to both of those books will be put in all social media posts. And I truly do appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to these episodes. Not everybody's going to learn something from everything, but I think someone can always learn from one of these episodes. And I think anybody that's been to combat or has been a cop or has had to deal with trauma can really learn from this episode and the things that Ned shared today, and as well as what he wrote about in We Marines. So thank you very much, Ned. God bless everybody. Take care and be kind to one another.